John and Charlie, two brothers, had always lived a simple life in the village. The rolling hills and green fields outside their home were all they knew. Since their parents passed away, they had to live and work with Farmer Grant, a man who was kind but strict. Farmer Grant was like a second father to them, but his work was hard and needed careful attention. John, being the older brother, was always calm and wise. He liked to take his time and think about things before acting. Charlie, on the other hand, was younger and often rushed through everything. He liked to get things done fast, even if it meant making mistakes. One sunny morning, Farmer Grant gave them their first big task of the day. "Go to the village shop and bring back the things we need for the farm," he said. John immediately began to write a list, noting down all the items they would need: flour, potatoes, salt, and some tools. Charlie, who didn't want to waste any time, grabbed his hat and hurried out the door. "I'll go ahead, John. I'll be quick," he called as he dashed off to the village shop. John shook his head, knowing Charlie wasn't the best at following instructions. He slowly folded the list and tucked it into his pocket before following his brother. When he arrived at the shop, Charlie was already there, standing in front of the counter. The shopkeeper, a jolly woman named Mrs. May, smiled at Charlie. "What can I get for you today, young man?" Charlie glanced at the shelves without much thought and said, "I need some food for the farm. Just grab whatever you have." Mrs. May raised an eyebrow. "Do you know what you need?" Charlie nodded, but his eyes darted around, unsure. Mrs. May started grabbing random items off the shelves: flour, buckets, hammers, and a few bags of seeds, and placed them on the counter. Charlie didn't question her choices. "That's it, I think," he said excitedly, thinking he had completed the task. Back at the farm, John waited outside the barn, watching for Charlie. When his younger brother returned with the bags and tools, John's face dropped. "What did you bring?" John asked, his voice calm, but with a hint of frustration. Charlie proudly displayed the items he had picked. "I got everything, just like you said," Charlie said, grinning. John opened the bags one by one. "Flour? Buckets? A hammer? These aren't food, Charlie. What were you thinking?" Charlie looked confused. "Well, Mrs. May gave them to me. I didn't know what we needed, so I just grabbed what she had." John sighed. "You didn't even look at the list, did you?" He shook his head, trying to stay patient. "You have to think before you act, Charlie." Charlie frowned. "I did what I thought was best. You're just slow, John." John's eyes softened, but his tone was firm. "Rushing doesn't make things better. You have to stop and think before you do something. Charlie didn't fully understand, but he nodded. He didn't like being told he was wrong, but he could tell John cared about getting things right. As the sun set behind the farm, John and Charlie returned to the barn, each carrying the things they needed to fix the day's tasks. John took a deep breath, knowing tomorrow would be another challenge. The next morning, Farmer Grant had another task for the brothers. This time, it was to take care of the cows and sheep. John knew this was an important job. He had worked with the animals before, so he knew how to take care of them. He made sure to prepare their food and checked the water troughs. Charlie, on the other hand, was already itching to be done with the task. He glanced at the cows and sheep and decided they didn't need as much care as John thought. "I'll just let them roam free. They'll be fine," Charlie said with a grin. John raised his eyebrows. "Charlie, you can't just let them roam. They could get into trouble." But Charlie wasn't listening. He opened the gate and let the animals wander off into the field. He was sure everything would be fine. The cows, however, didn't stay in the field. They wandered into the neighbor's garden, munching on the vegetables that the neighbor had worked so hard to grow. The neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, wasn't happy. John heard the shouting from across the field. He rushed over, trying to calm things down. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. We'll fix this." But Charlie didn't understand why she was angry. "What's the big deal? It's just a garden," he muttered under his breath. Mrs. Thompson folded her arms. "You can't let animals roam like that. You've ruined everything." John apologized again, trying to help the neighbor fix the damage, while Charlie just stood there, confused. "I don't get it. It's just vegetables." "Who cares?" Charlie said. John turned to him with a serious look. "You need to care. These things matter to people. You can't just do whatever you want without thinking of the consequences." Charlie didn't say anything, but felt a small twinge of guilt. Maybe John was right. The next task for John and Charlie came in the form of a broken fence. Farmer Grant had asked them to repair it because the cows often wandered into the neighbor's yard. If the fence wasn't fixed soon, there could be more trouble. John took a deep breath and looked at the fence carefully. It wasn't a small job, and he knew it would take time and attention. "Charlie, we need to fix this carefully," John said. "We can't rush it." Charlie nodded, but didn't look convinced. He was already thinking of how quickly he could get the job done and move on to something else. "We don't need to make it perfect, John. Let's just fix it quickly, and we can call it a day," he suggested with a grin. John shook his head, but Charlie was already getting to work. He grabbed a hammer and nails and started fixing the fence in a hurry. John, on the other hand, took his time, measuring the pieces of wood and making sure they fit well. Charlie's impatience got the best of him. He hammered a nail in too quickly, and the wood splintered. He groaned. "This is taking forever. I'll just fix it faster." He kept going, and soon enough, the fence started to look worse than before. John looked over at Charlie and saw the problem. "Charlie, stop. You can't rush this. You need to do it carefully, or it will fall apart again." But Charlie wasn't listening. He just wanted to finish the job, even if it meant making mistakes. When he finished, he stood back to admire his work, only for the fence to fall down with a loud crash. "See, John?" Charlie said, laughing. "What's the big deal?" John was frustrated, but didn't lose his temper. "This isn't funny, Charlie. The fence needs to stay up, or the cows will escape again." As they fixed the fence together, John was careful to make sure everything was right. Charlie, though still a bit impatient, started to slow down and watch his brother. By the time they finished, the fence was stronger, and the animals wouldn't be able to get through it. But the lesson was clear. Rushing through things only caused more work in the long run. One day, Farmer Grant asked John and Charlie to gather wood from the forest. It wasn't a difficult job, but it required walking through the woods and taking the longer path around the trees. John knew the route well and understood that it was safer, even though it would take more time. Charlie, however, wasn't interested in the long walk. "We should take the shortcut," Charlie insisted, pointing to a narrow, unmarked path through the trees. "It's quicker." John shook his head. "That path is dangerous. We don't know what's in there, and we could get lost." But Charlie didn't listen. "It's fine, John. We'll be quick, and we won't get lost. I'm sure we'll be fine." After some arguing, John reluctantly agreed to follow Charlie, though he was still nervous. They started down the shortcut, with the tall trees overhead blocking most of the light. The air felt heavier, and the path was rocky and uneven. As they walked, Charlie's confidence grew, but John's worry grew as well. The path seemed to wind in unexpected ways, and they soon realized they had strayed off course. "See? I told you this was a bad idea," John said, frustration creeping into his voice. "We're lost, Charlie." Charlie, now feeling a bit unsure, tried to calm him down. "We're not lost. We just need to keep going. I'm sure it will lead to the forest clearing." Hours passed, and the brothers only found themselves deeper in the woods. They had no idea which way to go. John, despite his worries, took charge and tried to lead them back. They had been walking for a long time, and both were exhausted. Finally, they saw a small glimpse of sunlight through the trees and found their way back to the main path. They stumbled out of the woods, tired and dirty, just as evening was setting in. Farmer Grant was waiting for them by the barn when they returned, shaking his head. "You two were gone all day. What happened?" John spoke up first. "Charlie wanted to take the shortcut through the woods, and we got lost." Charlie tried to defend himself. "It wasn't my fault. The path just confused us. It wasn't our mistake." Farmer Grant looked at them both. "Well, the shortcut may have seemed like a good idea, but in the end, it caused you both a lot of trouble. You should have listened to John. Sometimes the longer path is the better one." Charlie didn't say anything, but he realized that John was right. Next time, he promised himself, he would listen more carefully. Now, from this point, the story will be continued in the next part.